Hello, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know we have some people coming in the door, signing in. It's wide open on this side if you want to flip over. But we do have an action-packed agenda, so if anybody didn't see the cartoon, hopefully the FDA Santa does not visit you. But if you haven't gotten the letter, then they're probably not coming this week. So the first thing I just want to mention really quickly is hopefully all of you were handed a remote. If you remember this past spring and parts of this summer, we tried using Poll Everywhere, where we were asking people to use your phone or your computer, and we just didn't really get the response that we really were hoping for. There's close to 100 to 150 people who attend Research Matters, and we were getting maybe 40 responses. So we had a demo for iClicker that the rest of the institution was looking at, and we decided to go ahead and purchase some remotes. Make sure that you do not leave with the remote. They are not cheap. So please hand your remotes back in. Kathy is standing at that door. Satish and Heather are standing at this door. If you have to leave early, feel free to just drop your remote in the box, but please don't take the remotes with you. You can't do anything with them. They will not work on your home TV, on your Apple TV, on your Roku, your Chromecast, whatever you have. So first, we're just going to go through some quick staff updates. So really quickly, Kathy is right there, and most of you know her. And she joined the HRPP as a regulatory analyst on November 25th. And we also had Hend Nadeem, who is also internal here at UT Southwestern. She joined us on December 2nd. So we're super excited to have them as part of the office. The next thing that we'll go through really quickly are metrics. And I just wanted to point out that when I looked at the metrics and I was looking at the 6-month numbers, this is the highest I've ever seen some of these numbers. So Chuck actually had mentioned that he felt like he was assigning a lot more modifications than normal, and the data proves that Chuck is right. He's not crazy. We did have close to 150 more modifications this month than we normally do. So people are saying Chuck is still crazy. I'm not going to comment on that. So our turnaround time for full board studies, we did see a slight increase, but I will tell you that for fiscal year 2020, right now our median turnaround time for full board studies is actually 41 days. If we include stipulations, it's 48.5 days. So we're super excited because we're right at that goal, and we're going to be looking at the data to see why we had a slight spike here. I suspect it's because we had a couple deferrals come back in, and then that just drove the number up. With exempt, yes, the number is actually 0. So this is because we're bringing over all of the Texas Health Resources studies, and when we bring those over, those don't take any time within the office. So the number truly is 0 for our expedited turnaround time in the last 30 days. For exempt studies, we were at 40 days. And for Reliance, if you have been working with Kimberly in the past past couple months, Kimberly took over for Rania after Rania went over to, sorry Rania, I don't remember where you went. Endocrinology, thank you Rania. And Kimberly is catching up and starting to get on top of the queue that she has in place now, along with making hopefully some improvements based on what other institutions are doing with their single IRB processes. So getting into the meat, this is slightly different from the order that we have in here. Kelly is actually gonna go after I'm all set with what I'm talking about. So we're gonna make sure that we give enough time for Kelly at the end. But the first thing that you have in a handout, and it will be posted to the website, Rhonda just hasn't had time to do that yet, is an update on pregnant partners. So effective as of yesterday, our stance on pregnant partners is that the collection of outcome data on pregnant partners or their child will not be considered research. And the reason we're doing that is because this is really consistent with what the regulations say. The regulations define human subjects research as a systematic investigation designed to contribute or develop generalizable knowledge. And when we're collecting data from pregnant partners, when their partner is part of a research study and they become pregnant, first of all, we don't necessarily know that the partner was the father. That's just a reality, and so we're collecting data that may not truly be valid. The other big point here is that it's not necessarily systematic. This is just something that the FDA has asked drug companies to start collecting to see if there's really any trends related to outcomes of pregnancies from these particular people. So it is not going to be considered research. And what that means is that your consent documents for the subjects can go ahead and continue to inform subjects that if your partner becomes pregnant, that we may ask the pregnant partner to sign a consent form where they would give data. Similar to some sort of release of information form, if you go to the doctor and they say, hey, I want the data that that your doctors at UT Southwestern have, can you send that over to me? So the consent forms can continue to mention that. But if you submit a pregnant partner consent form to the IRB, we will consider those subjects to be research subjects, and we will require all the appropriate information to be submitted for approval. The example here is inclusion, exclusion criteria, and if you've had this recently with a study, we're also asking for recruitment and consent plans. We're asking for a consent document. So we're asking for a lot of information. If your sponsors require that your pregnant partner consent form be submitted to us, then we are going to review it as research. However, if the only thing that's going to be mentioned is in the protocol and in the consent form regarding this, if this happens, we would collect data and that's it. This is not a research procedure and we don't need inclusion, exclusion criteria, consent form, all that stuff. However, the other thing I just want to make very clear is that this does not affect subjects who become pregnant. So they became pregnant while they were enrolled on a research study. So they are still research subjects, and any collection of data from the pregnant subject or their child is a research procedure. So any quick questions about that? I think this will make everybody's lives a lot easier because sponsors are including this in their protocols and sometimes in the consent documents, but I've never actually seen that this has happened, where we know that a pregnant partner or a partner has become pregnant while their significant other is enrolled on a research study. So we're doing all of this work with not much bang for the buck at the end. So hopefully this will make everybody's lives a little bit easier. This memo will be available on the website, and if your study is not yet approved and the IRB staff have asked you for this information, you can just respond back and say, per the memo, they are no longer considered research subjects. I'm not sure what Satish is trying to tell me. Go ahead, Leah.
How do you define child? Like how far out that can we collect information on the baby?
That's a great question. So the question was, how do you define child? I would define anything after birth. So in terms of what I've seen other IRBs considering, if we're talking about outcomes of birth, was it a viable baby, that sort of stuff, that's just outcomes of the birth. If you're collecting data hours, days, or months after the child is born, then we're collecting data from the child. And you would need to get parental permission for that child and have inclusion, exclusion criteria, recruitment, consenting plan, all that sort of stuff. Okay. So the other thing that you have that was handed out was a translation tip sheet. So this is our first test of this system. So make sure, first of all, that you turn the clicker on. There is a power button. So turn the clicker on, and then let me go ahead and start the poll. Oh. Okay. Wow, I think this is responses. That is really fantastic. So the first question is, were you aware of the HRPP translation service? And I don't know how many remotes we handed out, how many we have left. Not that many over there? Okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead and just for the sake of this, I'm gonna move on and I'm gonna show hide results, maybe? There it is. Okay, so most of you knew about the translation service, but there's enough of you here who didn't know about it, so let me hide that and go back here and continue on. So the next question is, have you used the HRPP translation service? It's amazing how fast that number jumps up compared to when we use Pull Everywhere. Okay, so I'll give 5 more seconds. Okay. So a majority of you have not used it. Okay, so we're going to go through and kind of talk about what the translation service looks like, so that way if you need to use it, you can. So you have this tip sheet. It will also be published to the website. But hopefully what you'll find is that your responsibilities in this process are very limited. Most of the work is going to be done by the HRPP. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to download the Form Z from our website. You do have to make sure that when you're completing it that you fill out the chart of account. So don't give us a subledger number because those are no longer valid, and you do have to have a chart of account. You can request a quote beforehand, but sometimes not having that chart of account at the front end just delays things once we have the quote. So then you submit that either to the HRPP mailbox. You can submit them directly to me as well, along with the study documents to be translated. I request that just because sometimes it does make the process for me a little bit easier. You'll see me potentially working on them when Kelly is presenting, and so sometimes it does make it so that I can send it off for a quote instead of going into EIRB to grab your documents. I will confirm that they're the most recently IRB approved documents before we proceed with anything, but we'll request a free quote. So there's no cost to getting a quote from TransPerfect. So if you're not sure if you're going to be able to pay for it, but you might have some money, request a quote. It's okay to say no. And there's no obligation to proceed if we get the quote and then you don't want to proceed. You can use another service, somebody outside of UT Southwestern. You could use the Form Z1, the translation verification. You do not have to use this just because you've requested a quote. So I'll send it to the study team, and if you did not copy the PI on the communication, I always copy the PI on the communication. And the quote you'll see in the document, time to complete. So there's been some questions of how long should I expect, and it's right there in the quote, 7 days. We recently had a project that the turnaround time was 28 days, but it was a fairly large project with multiple documents. It will make sure that it'll include the files to be translated, so if I potentially got it wrong, you can always confirm that these are the documents I really wanted the work done on, and then I'll include a total cost and breakdown. In that breakdown will include a charge for words that have never been translated, and then it will include a cost for words that are translated for UT Southwestern, but the context is slightly different. For example, red versus red house. So apparently, in some languages, the red there might change because of the context. And so depending on the language, there might be a charge for red versus red house if we've never used it as red house. And then if we've translated the word exactly in context, then it's going to be the absolute lowest rate that they charge. And then every project will include a formatting charge. They go through and they make sure that there's no glaring spaces. They're also going to put it into their memory bank, so that way the next time a project comes through, hopefully we get more exact context matches. And then this is actually the reason why none of you can request the translation, because then each department or each team would have their own memory bank. If we do it as one department requesting it, then we have one memory bank, and then the translations become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And I have noticed that trend in the year and a half that we've been working with them. So if the project is approved, this is a future state thing. Hopefully it's going to be in place within the next week or so. The HRPP staff will, one of the people within our office will actually go into your chart of account, grab the money, and pull it out immediately. And it'll come into one of our accounts, and then when the project comes through and we have the invoice, we pay using the money we just grabbed from you. If that fails for any reason, then we just won't proceed with the project, and we'll ask you a question of what chart of account do you want us to use. And then once we do have the money, I'll go ahead and inform the company that the project can initiate. And if there are, rarely there are some requests for clarification if we saw this document, or there was one time a study consent document had some hidden text. I honestly did not know you could do that in Microsoft Word, learned something new through this whole process, but there was hidden text. And the study team confirmed we do not want that text translated. So then I sent that right back to the company. When we get the documents, I send the translated documents and certificate to the study team, and then you can go ahead and submit those in a modification. If you are submitting that in a modification and the only thing that you're changing is the translated documents, then make sure that you select administrative, because those can be processed by anybody within the office. It doesn't have to go to an IRB member. And then, like I said, the invoices will be paid directly by the HRPP. So then the finance people on the study team side don't have to worry about, did this go through? It'll come directly to us and we pay it. Okay, then the next. I will consider using the HRPP translation service in the future. I wanted to have more than 2 questions, so this is a little bit of a fluff question. Okay. Yay! Maybe I shouldn't have told you that it was a fluff question, but hopefully we'll see more requests coming through. Okay, so moving back into this, let me get rid of that. So we do have some updates regarding the common rule and the continuing review requirement. So these slides are directly from the January 2019 Research Matters presentation. And you all remember that presentation vividly, I know. But basically, the common rule updated the requirement regarding continuing review. So unless it's deemed otherwise by the IRB, any study that is approved as minimal risk under expedited categories, or it was more than minimal risk and now is at the point where they're just doing follow-up with clinical care or progressed data analysis, we don't have to require a continuing review. So this was super exciting. But as an institution, we also told you that we are going to require some sort of check-in for these protocols, and we were going to make those changes prior to January 2020. For those, for the check-in, there would not be a regulatory expiration date, and we would have notices pre- and post-check-in date, and then our policy allows that if you do not ever respond to us about this check-in, that we could close the study. So, looping back with you to tell you what we're planning on doing regarding this process. So if the study was approved before January 21st, 2019, was approved after January 21st, 2019 under FDA regulations, because remember the common rule updates only affected studies that were regulated by HHS. It did not necessarily affect FDA regulations. FDA has not accepted the common rule changes as of yet. Or it was approved after 1/21/2019 as a more than minimal risk study because they just said that it had to be minimal risk or at a point where you're just collecting follow-up data or data analysis, then continuing review will continue to be required and there will be a regulatory expiration date. So that doesn't really change anything for all of you. If the study was approved after January 21st, 2019 as a minimal risk study, was approved after January 21st, 2019, and it was more than minimal risk, and it's at either one of these 2 states, or the study is relying on an external IRB, then what we're going to do is we're going to send that through the annual update pathway. And there will not be a regulatory expiration date. So there will be an expiration date in the system, but if it passes by that expiration date, your study does not have to immediately stop everything like it would with a regulatory expiration date. So what we're calling that in the system is an annual update. So the workflow is going to use the same continuing review smart form. So it's not going to be different smart forms. And 1.1.1, where it's special protocol types, right now we're asking, does this study rely on an external IRB? Does it utilize a humanitarian use device? Does it utilize, is it an ethics study? And I can't remember the 4th option. But the first option regarding reliance is going to be updated to include this annual update, and it will be automatically selected by the system if it meets the requirements to go through the annual update process. It routes to a simple 1-page of the smart form. That's going to be section 12. And depending on what your study does, that annual update will be as few as 7 questions and then as many as 18 questions. So it is definitely a reduction compared to the normal continuing review form. And we're planning on that workflow being installed in EIRB before the end of the year. So it's currently under testing, and as long as nothing goes catastrophically wrong, then we'll have it in place before you all come back from your holiday break. So the one thing that just keep in mind that we're going to experience as we test, and we'll have more information to come about it in an actual tip sheet, 1.1.1, if it's selected to that first status, You can't change it, we can't change it, and that's all very intentional because otherwise the system would be very confused and we'd just break it. So what we need to do is that if the study really doesn't fit the annual update workflow, after you consult maybe with HRPP office, work with us. There'll be processes in the tip sheet of withdrawing that and then reinitializing it as an actual continuing review. There will still be notices, 60, 45, and 30-day notices going out from the system, and we've updated that to make it clear that there's not necessarily a regulatory expiration date, and it's also not going to be referred to as a continuing review. It'll be referred to as an annual update. And our policy, just as a reminder, does require that this be submitted. And if it's not submitted in a timely manner or you're not communicating with us, the policy does allow for us to go in and close your study. So even though we're not going to say that your study activities have to end when you've bypassed that non-regulatory expiration date for an annual update, we can still close the study. So we still need these to come in and understand whether or not the study is still continuing on or whether you can go ahead and close it. So that was it on the annual update. And now we're just going to move into very quickly about 5 to 10 minutes for Greenlight questions and answers. I don't know if anybody has anything. We talked about Greenlight. You'll notice I'm no longer calling it Project Greenlight because it's been installed. Therefore, it is no longer a project. It is just part of the system. But we talked about it in October, and so we're just coming back around now that it's been implemented to see if anybody has any questions, any concerns that we can address. The one thing that I will let everybody know is that there was an issue regarding seeing activated studies within your inbox, but that's a known issue, and I believe it might have already been fixed if it hasn't been fixed yet. And if not, the fix will be coming very soon. Okay. Wow, I thought we would have a lot more questions about Greenlight. Okay. Well, if there's no questions, then I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to Kelly to talk through update on HRPP reporting policies.
Hi, I'm Kelly Benton. I've talked to a lot of you or emailed with a lot of you. I recognize some faces in here. Thanks for coming. So we're going to talk about HRPP reporting policies and procedures today. I'll start by saying, what happened, Josh? That I talk fast and I don't read my slides, but I have a lot of information in there so you can refer back to it if you have questions. So we have a big agenda. We're going to talk about what's the difference between IRB and the HRPP, how to prevent noncompliance, what the changes to the policy are, how to discern what and when to report events. There'll be some companion documents I created and decision trees to help you make those decisions. We'll briefly talk about the HRPP reporting policies that did not change and little helpful tips and tidbits there. Reliance on non-UT Southwestern IRBs will be discussed, how to complete the EIRB RE Smart Form, answers to your frequently asked questions, resources, and Q&A. So a lot of people get this confused. The IRB is a board. It has doctors and nurses, community representatives. If they're talking about a study involving prisoners, a prisoner rep would be there. They have to have a non-scientist. This is what, if you submit your study and it's greater than minimal risk, you will submit it to our office, the HRPP office. IRB staff, which is really HRPP staff, will do a pre-review before it goes to this board. So a lot of people ask this question when you have a study that relies on a non-UT Southwestern IRB. I'm doing duplicate work. I've already submitted it to WERB, so why am I submitting it to the UT Southwestern IRB? You're not. You're submitting it to the Human Research Protection Program. That is a program that the institution has to ensure the protection of human research subjects. It's our office, the HRPP office, it's SPA, it's OCR, it's Office of Compliance, it's you guys as the research community, and there's a lot more. It's really large. So when you are referring to IRB staff, you're probably talking about people like Eric, Chuck, Allison Griffin, Debbie, people like that. The HRPP staff is a little bit different. Our little tree for the quality assurance and monitoring, we're not IRB staff. We're do a little bit different from that. So we will triage all the reportable events. We'll come out and do for-cause and not-for-cause audits. And if your study is relying on a non-UT Southwestern IRB, you still have to submit it for a shortened review by the Reliance team, which is now Kimberly Hawkins. Local context information has to be added into those. And then certain events that happen to your subjects while you're on study will also have to be reported to the HRPPO, the office. So it's not duplication. It feels like duplication. It's not. You're reporting to your IRB on the outside, and you're reporting to the Human Research Protection Program here at UT Southwestern. So hopefully that kind of clears things up. So how to prevent noncompliance? You need to know your studies in and out, your reporting requirements. That's for your external IRB. May all be different. ADVAR is different from WERB, and WERB is different from CIRB. What our policies are in the HRPP, what your institution, Children's, has different policies than Parkland has. You need to know all that. So the IRB, whoever reviews your study, will go to that board, they'll approve it, and they've approved it exactly as you have submitted it. So any changes that you make, you need to get prior IRB approval unless it's for an emergency. So the best way to avoid noncompliance is to follow the protocol, the SMART form, the informed consent, exactly as written. Ask your PI, your manager, your coworker if you have questions before you do or don't do something, and always use checklists. Your studies are so complicated, there's no way to remember everything without having a checklist. So what are some of the changes to the terminology? So what changed were the compliance policies, the non-compliance definitions, and the companion tools. What didn't change was UPERSOs, exceptions, which are also called waivers, emergency deviations, complaints, and the reporting timelines. It's still 5 days. It changed on November 18th. You can find the changes in Section 9 of the HRPP Policy and Procedure Manual and on the QA and monitoring webpage under reportable events. We changed it to harmonize with other IRBs because of the single IRB mandate. Very soon you'll start to see multi-center studies will be under one IRB. SMART IRB got together and they had a huge working group of people from all over and said, how can we make this similar? Because if you have a study under WERB, you also have to report to us. So we're trying to harmonize that as much as possible to avoid confusion. And it applies to everybody, all non-exempt human research studies conducted by or on behalf of UT Southwestern staff. Are there any questions about this as a whole? Okay, so what changed is there's no longer major or minor deviations. That's gone. Now we're talking about noncompliance, serious noncompliance, and continuing noncompliance. Those are the new terms. Noncompliance basically is just when you don't follow the protocol, when you don't follow what you told the IRB you were going to do, when you don't get performance site approval at your institution if it's required. Anything that kind of goes wrong, you do something you weren't supposed to do on the protocol or you forget to do something, that is all noncompliance. This is also known as deviations, violations, departure from protocol. It's all kind of the same thing. So if the noncompliance is not serious or continuing, you will track it, evaluate it in real time, and summarize it at continuing review. Serious noncompliance is any noncompliance that increases the risk of harm to subjects, it adversely affects their rights, safety, or welfare, and substantially affects the integrity of the data. So I get this a lot where, oh, we forgot to collect this, that, or the other. It doesn't substantially affect the data, so you don't need to report it. If it's a questionnaire, if it's one time you forget something. This is, I've treated a subject for 8 weeks, put them through all these risks, and now I found out it was a pain study, and in their chart, they were on another pain med the whole time. So their data has to be thrown out. They've been put through these procedures and risks this whole time, and now it's invalid. So it really needs to be a very high bar. So if you have serious noncompliance, you will report that within 5 working days of discovery. So if you are relying on WERB, You'll report it to them according to their criteria, but you will also report it to us within 5 days. Continuing noncompliance is a little bit more difficult for study teams to see. Sometimes you'll know that last year you submitted a reportable event because you weren't collecting a test, for example, and the board determined that was serious noncompliance. A year comes around and the monitor comes and they're like, you're still not collecting this lab. What's going on? That would be continuing noncompliance. Also, if you tell the IRB, this is my corrective action plan, and we find out a year later that you never implemented your corrective action plan, which has happened, that is also continuing noncompliance. Same with serious noncompliance, you'll report it within 5 days of discovery. Okay? Discerning what and when to report. So I've been trying to think about ways for people to think about reportable events. So I came up with a visual analogy. So a child, just in general, gets bit by bugs. What's going to happen? Probably nothing. Treat it with some over-the-counter bug spray. You might watch them for a little while, see what happens. Okay, it's not really that big of a deal. Okay, think about that at continuing review, okay? But what if your child gets bit by the bugs and you know your child is highly allergic to that particular bug? You may have to go to the ER at that point because they may have an anaphylactic reaction. But who knows that? Do I know your child or do you know your child? So think of that. It's all going to come together. It may not make sense right now, but it's going to come together. Okay? The next thing is your child gets bit by a dog. What are you going to do? You may go to urgent care, depending. But if you see a child that gets bit by a dog, you're probably going to rush them to urgent care. So imagine it's someone you're babysitting, okay? But your child gets bit by a dog. What if it's your dog? What if it's a Yorkie and it doesn't even break the skin? You're probably not going to do anything. If it's a German Shepherd and it takes a chunk out of your arm, you're probably going to go to the urgent care, okay? But you know your child, you know that dog. If it's a stray dog, you don't know if it's had its shots. If it's your dog, you do know it's had the shots. So you are weighing all the information that only you know or you know best. A child gets bit by a snake, you're going to go to the ER, okay? Think of that as your reportable event. If your child gets bit by a snake, you're probably still going to go to the ER, okay? But if it's your pet gardener snake or whatever, snake, it may have not broken the skin, you may know it, and you may not. But for the most part, when you think snake bite, that's reportable event. That's ER. Try to keep that in your mind. So if you put it together, you, which is the study team, will know your study best, okay? You should be able to make these decisions on your own 99% of the time based on the type of study you have, what you know about your study, and what you know about the event. 1% of the time, it will fall into a gray area that you may have to consult. But when you call our office and ask us, we are a stranger. We have 4,000 studies that we look at all the time. So when you call us about your study, I'm not the expert of your study. You're the expert of your study. Just like you know your child, you know your study. So try to keep that in mind. And then I have this little analogy. It's a bug bite. I'm going to submit that at continuing review. Snake bite is a reportable event. Dog bite, 99% of the time, it can go to continuing review, and 1% of the time, it will be a reportable event. So this is a little visual analogy I have, and I'll have this electronically sent to you to kind of keep that in mind. Does whatever happened on your study, does it rise to the level of a reportable event, an ER visit, a snake bite? That's when you know to report it. Okay, so companion documents and decision trees that go along with this. So I have a newly revised reportable event guidance table. I changed the color slightly, but I also added the version number 3 and the date at the bottom so you know if you're using the right one. Still pretty much the same, except the definitions for serious and continuing noncompliance are added and major deviation is gone. This is the newly revised UPERSO decision tree, which I've sent to a lot of y'all. What's new is I added a little tree to look at, is this also noncompliance? So if you have a study drug and you're supposed to administer 100 milligrams and you administer 1,000 milligrams, It's going to be a UPERSO and it's going to be non-compliant. So you'll want to report both of those things at RE. So you'll do that little evaluation, but you'll still come back and you'll still go down your UPERSO decision tree. That's also version 3 and the dates at the bottom. Then I created some non-compliance decision trees. So the first step that you will do is you will answer the questions, and these are our policies, where the federal regulations and state laws followed, where institutional policies followed, and where the IRB requirements followed as written. If you answer yes to all of that, it's not even non-compliance, you're done, okay? But you may want to conduct a UPERSO evaluation using that decision tree. If you answer no to any of those questions, it is non-compliance. But at this point, you still don't know if you're going to report it yet. Okay, I know it's non-compliance, but what do I need to determine now? Is it serious? So then you'll go to step 2, and you'll do the same thing. It's the 3 questions from the policy. If you answer no to all, it's not serious non-compliance. If you answer yes to any, it is serious non-compliance. You will need to report those within 5 working days via reportable event. You'll still go to step 3 because it may not be serious, but it could be continuing. So you need to make that determination, and that's step 3. Again, answer the questions. If it's no to both, it's not continuing noncompliance. If yes to either one, it is continuing noncompliance, and you'll report it within 5 working days of discovery. And you'll also then conduct the UPERSO review using the UPERSO decision tree. Depending on whichever tree you start with, if you start with the noncompliance, it'll refer you to the UPERSO and vice versa. Things that did not change, before I go on to that, are there any questions about the terms, definitions that did change? So remember, it really needs to be serious for it to be reported as a reportable event or continuing. Okay? So what didn't change? Exceptions. It's the same thing. These are things you have to get approved before you do it. This is things that are in the investigator's control. These are a one-time thing. I want to enroll somebody who's 3 years old, but the study doesn't start enrolling people till they're 4. That you need to have a certain value on your lab test, and it's slightly below or above that. Get permission from your reviewing IRB. If your study is under CIRB, that's who you have to get permission from. If you are relying on an external IRB, the UT Southwestern HRPP cannot approve those exceptions. But remember to do those ahead of time. And it does not include out-of-window visits. We would be overwhelmed with that. That happens all the time. Emergency deviations did not change. So if you have to violate the protocol to protect someone's life or physical well-being or avoid immediate apparent harm, you are allowed to do that by the regulations. The regulations specify this is really the only time you can make changes to the IRB-approved research without prior approval. When this happens, report it within 5 working days of occurrence. UPERSOs, this trips people up a lot. I get a lot of reports of UPERSOs that aren't UPERSOs. Remember, UPERSOs are unexpected, and that means the event, the risk is not described at all, or it's happening more severely or more frequently than it's specified in the protocol, the IB, the informed consent. It is probably or definitely related to participating in the research, and it suggests that the research itself places subjects or others at greater risk of harm. Again, if it appears that it's meeting these 3 criteria, all 3 criteria, report within 5 days of discovery. So people ask, what does unexpected mean? It's something you don't expect for that population, for example, and I've used this analogy a million times. There's a 20-year-old in an acne study and he has a stroke. We don't expect 20-year-olds to have strokes, okay? So we might want to say, hey, that's definitely unexpected. But we're still not done because we don't know now, is it related or is it not related? If it's related, then does it suggest that the research is now riskier than you knew before? So if it's not included in the documents or it's not accurate in the documents, and again, if it's more severe or happening more frequently, that means it's unexpected. But you're still not done. You've only answered part 1 of the question. Okay, probably related means there is a preponderance of evidence, 51%. You have some sort of basis for fact of why you think the procedure, intervention, device, drug caused the event. Possibly means could, might, maybe. We don't really know. We don't know. There's nothing that the IRB or the HRPP can do with we don't really know. We're not in that business. That's your data safety monitoring. They can make those decisions. We cannot make those decisions. So make sure it's probably. Another thing that happens very often is I get SUSARs, MedWatch, and the CIOMS reports submitted as UPERSOs all the time. There are two different types of sponsors. There's commercial sponsors. These people make the drug, they make the device. Then there are research sponsors. So some PIs here hold an IND for a drug that they're doing a study for. And if something happens here, they still need to communicate with that commercial sponsor. The commercial sponsor will know, hey, have we ever seen this before? That's really important to know that difference. The FDA even specifies this in their guidance. Commercial sponsors will know more about the drug. They're getting reports from usually all over the world. The PI here is only seeing his 10, 20, 50 subjects. He's not seeing the whole picture. This is even FDA guidance right here. The sponsor determines reportability. So when you see those MedWatch and CIOMS forms, the reason they even started is because that investigator somewhere said, I think this is possibly related. And so they've submitted it. The sponsor is required to look at this and say, have we seen this before? Have we seen things similar to this? What should we do? They will make those decisions. You may be copied on that report, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is a UPERSO. Sometimes they're giving you this information kind of as a heads up because something has to happen to the first person the one time, right? So if you see a little boy in Italy who has this cancer, you have the CIOMS report, and you see this and the sponsor says, we've never seen this before, we don't think it's related. But you're seeing your 5-year-old subject and you're starting to see some of those signs and symptoms and go, wait a minute, I remember reading about this. Maybe I need to do some extra tests. Maybe I need to monitor more frequently. You might want to look into it a little bit more, but it still doesn't mean it's quite a UPERSO yet. So the sponsor, and here I mean the commercial sponsor, determines whether it is related to the drug device, not the PI. And I have source for you to look at. So what does it mean where it says, suggests the research places subjects or others at an increased risk of harm than was previously known? When you have submitted your IB, your protocol, your informed consent, you have all your risks in there. We are expecting those things to happen. When a subject's child ingests the study drug that is unexpected, it's definitely related to the study because you wouldn't even have the study drug without being in the study, and it suggests an increased risk of harm to that child. So that is definitely a UPERSO. Even if nothing happens to them, there is that increased risk. So new or different risk that affects subjects' willingness to stay in the study must be disclosed to subjects per the regulations. So remember that UPERSOs are always new information. It's usually bad. I can't think of a good UPERSO. Most AEs and SAEs, SUSAR, MedWatch, CIOMS reports are not UPERSOs. UPERSOs can be non-AEs like a breach, or you find out your nurse has been working under an expired license or revoked, which is worse. UPERSOs require changes. So if you submit to me and say, hey, this is unexpected, it's probably related, and it does suggest that the research shows a greater risk to subjects, but we're not going to do anything about it. We're not going to tell anybody. We're not going to do anything. That doesn't even make sense. There will be an action. So I wrote here, if there's not a change based on that event, it is probably not a UPERSO. I can't think of a situation where you would have a UPERSO that you wouldn't do anything about. Even if it's a breach, you're still going to probably tell the subject, hey, I lost your chart on the subway in New York City. You still have to tell them, okay? So that's an action that you may take. So remember that. If you get your SUSAR, your CIOMS report, and you go, the investigator definitely thinks it's related or he wouldn't have submitted it, so ignore that. Go down to the company comment, sponsor assessment. It'll be towards the bottom. And they'll make their comment and they'll say, no changes are warranted at this time. It's not a UPERSO. They have to make changes if it is related. Events that aren't UPERSOs, they're described in the documents. They're possibly or not related. So we get a lot of reports of deaths that have absolutely nothing to do with the study. Don't submit those. It has to be related. It has to be all three criteria. Wait on those UPERSOs. You might get a SUSAR report that's not a UPERSO. Then they do a follow-up, and guess what? It is now a UPERSO. That's when the clock starts. That's when you would submit it. And in general, and I put down here, there's exceptions to this, one thing that happens to one subject one time is probably not a UPERSO. It can be, but not always. It's very rare. There are exceptions. And you can read the guidance for exceptions, so I hate to make general statements, but kind of keep that in mind. So all other research-related incidents, these are all tracked, evaluated in real time, and reported at continuing review or notice of study closure, whichever comes first. So if the noncompliance isn't serious or continuing, CR. If the adverse event doesn't meet all three UPERSO criteria, CR. The sponsor is making you submit it. No, we're going to talk about that. I have a slide coming up on that. Anything else that doesn't fit that serious noncompliance, continuing noncompliance, or UPERSO criteria, it's reported at CR. Or notice of study closure if you don't have a CR. When you rely on non-UT Southwestern IRBs, WIRB, CIRB, Advara, sometimes it's even another university, University of California at Davis, for example. I've seen those lately. When local events happen to your subjects, you are going to report that to the UT Southwestern HRPP, not the IRB. It looks a lot like the IRB, but it's not. It's the HRPP. So that would be if you have a local subject has an emergency deviation, serious or continuing noncompliance, a UPERSO, a research-related complaint that affects their rights, safety, or welfare. No, I don't like my coordinator, Missy. I hate the parking situation at UT Southwestern. I've got a ticket. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, my mom felt like she had to be in this study or Dr. Smith wouldn't see her anymore. My mom wanted to drop out of this study and we were coerced to stay in, whatever it is. It has to be really related to the right, safety, or welfare, related to the research. When you have an external IRB, you have to submit that event to that IRB according to their requirements. Those are usually between 5 and 10 days. But at the same time, you have to report that event to us within 5 days. So we're like going along. We're waiting to hear from that IRB. We need to know what they say, if anything at all, before we can proceed. Whenever they give you their response, and sometimes it's, yeah, we acknowledged it, but we're not going to do anything else, submit that to us within 10 days, and then we can go forward with our process. In the past, I have always instructed people, hey, this is under external IRB, you need to submit. It's always a battle. And we've talked in-house about if we're going to continue to do that or not. So I don't know that we are, but be warned and know that if you're audited, and they come in and they see you reported it to the HRPP at UT Southwestern, but you didn't report it to Advara, UC Davis, whoever your external IRB is, you will be cited on that. It's not reporting to that's your IRB, that's your reviewing IRB. Tips on completing the SMART form. Right now, it says departure from protocol. Think of that as the noncompliance. So your serious noncompliance, your continuing noncompliance, till it changes. Other, never ever check other. There will never be a time you need other. We're waiting for AIS to hide that box, but it hasn't happened yet. If you go to submit an event and you see it doesn't meet any of these things on here, it's probably not a reportable event. That's good news. REs must include all of the following. What happened, and that's usually what went wrong. What's the right way? Well, the protocol says this, but I did that. And why or how did it happen? Okay, what happened and why it happened are two different things. So I came to work today. Somebody says, well, why did you do that? I came to work today. That's not an answer. I came to work today because I have a mortgage and I have to get a paycheck to pay my mortgage. I got in a car wreck. Why'd you get in a car wreck? Somebody hit me. I wasn't paying attention. The weather was bad. There is a reason for why everything happens. So know that that's different. What happened and why it happened are two different things. You're going to talk about if it affects the subject's safety, rights, or welfare. How was the data affected? And what is your corrective and preventive action plan? We're going to talk about that next. So people say to me, what's a root cause? I forgot to do that lab. No. The root cause is the reason why you forgot. It could be a one-time thing, but it's probably because you don't have something written down like a checklist or a procedure or a flow chart. Root cause is the underlying reason why it occurred. You have to know what that is so that you can do an appropriate corrective and preventive action plan. If you don't know why something is being caused, you can't fix it. Corrective actions are those that you have taken to try to remedy a situation that's already occurred, and that's not always possible. Sometimes it is, and I have an example here. You forgot to reconsent a subject at today's visit, so you call them at home and say, I forgot to tell you this. We have a new risk. We're going to consent you at the next visit. You're going to document that in the chart. That's a way to correct that overstep where you didn't reconsent them at the visit. Preventive action then will be, okay, I'm going to get a flow chart. I'm going to get a checklist. I'm going to have a calendar reminder when subjects need to be reconsented. So that's trying to prevent it from happening again. So when you put the corrective actions together with the preventive actions, that's your CAPA plan. Are there any questions so far? Is it making sense? Okay. Everybody's like, no. So boring. Okay, answers to your frequently asked questions. I'm going to go through these real quick, but I wanted to have them in writing. We get this all the time. Got it yesterday. Is this the RE? Well, who knows your study best? You or me as a stranger? You know your study. So the answer to us will be, oh, Lord, what happened, Josh? Okay. Does it meet any of the reportable criteria? You need to look through that. If it doesn't meet those definitions, you report it at CR. Use your decision tree. Read the little one-sheeter if you don't want to read the entire policy, okay? Subject noncompliance. The subjects are not held to the protocol. They probably don't even know what the protocol is. Noncompliance is against an investigator or a study team. So if the subject does something that is not in compliance with what they should do, you only report that as if it causes them to have a UPERSO, and then you would report that as a UPERSO. What if the sponsor made me do it? That's what I get almost every day. Yeah, I knew I shouldn't have reported it, but the sponsor made me. Okay, the sponsor cannot make you violate UT Southwestern HRPP policy. They can't. So all you need to do is show them the policy and say it will be reported to the reviewing IRB or to UT Southwestern HRPP at continuing review or notice of study closure, whichever comes first. So you're not telling them, I am never going to tell them. You're just not going to tell them right now. Remember, reportable events are ER. Just because that sponsor wants it reported doesn't mean you have to do that. So show them the policy, explain that to them, and say, if I submit things when I know I shouldn't be, that I'm violating our policy. I'm in noncompliance with our policy. As a last resort, they can call me. I've had people call me with the CRA on the other end and tell them, no, it's not reportable. If you go to the ER with your child who has just got in a terrible car wreck, what if there are 30 people in front of your child that are in there because they have a cold or they got a bug bite or they stumped their toe? Very minor things. Those people are taking away from the time and energy that your child can be treated. It's the same thing with reportable events. We spend a lot of time and energy investigating, looking into these, and they end up not even really being reportable, but we're missing the things that are really urgent, that are really serious. Sponsor versus the funding source. This is another pain point for many people. You need to know who your sponsor is. It could be Pfizer. Pfizer could be the sponsor and they could be paying for the drug. A lot of times, Pfizer is giving you the drug for free, but your doctor, your PI, is the sponsor. You have to know that. Why? Because that sponsor has to report and do everything like Pfizer would. If you don't know that he's the sponsor, you're not reporting and doing those things. Another thing is when you submit to me for a single subject exception, I have to know who's the sponsor. Because you either have to get sponsor approval, or if it's a PI-initiated study, you have to get a colleague uninvolved in the care of that physician. If your PI is Dr. Smith and he wants an exception, don't attach a letter from Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith can't approve his own exception. It has to be the sponsor if it's externally sponsored or another colleague. So this is important to know. Who pays for things and who is the regulatory sponsor are two different things. Another thing that's different is the investigator versus a sponsor investigator. So your PI might just be the PI, but he also could be the sponsor, and you have a lot of responsibilities, all the sponsor responsibilities, all of his responsibilities. And when that is the case, if your Dr. Smith holds the IND, he is the sponsor investigator. Sponsor investigators are only people. They can only be people. They can't be Pfizer. They can't be UT Southwestern. They are Dr. So-and-so, whoever is that sponsor, okay? So a lot of times I'll get a report in and they'll say, Dr. Smith is discussing this with the sponsor. I'm like, really? Dr. Smith is discussing this with himself? He is the sponsor. You need to be able to distinguish that. And yes, it is okay for them to discuss the drug with Pfizer because they will know things, but you need to know the difference. What happens when you submit a reportable event? It is allegations. It's apparent at that time. In our office, we can say it's not noncompliance, we can say it's not serious or continuing, or we can say it's not a UPERSO. It may go to the RE subcommittee, but the IRB board will determine if it's serious or continuing noncompliance or a UPERSO. The PI can't determine that. I can't determine that. That has to be the board. Don't submit a mod and say, hey, we're updating the consent because this is a UPERSO and it hasn't even been reviewed by the IRB. We had that happen. We had to change all of that. It was a lot of work to go back and correct that. So remember, the IRB makes those determinations. If your study is with WERB, then the IO here will make that determination. What resources do we have? Our website, the policy and procedure manual. We have open office hours, research matters, phone, and email. On the reportable events webpage, there's a lot of documents that most of them we went over today. This is the entire team. If you have any questions with ct.gov, Amber's here. She will be glad to help you with that. She's taking over that role in our office. Any questions, comments? Yes. Well, it depends. We know that there's issues in some places you can't attach things. So it depends if it's the CR or the notice of study closure. Where would you attach those, all the other things? You may have to refer it in the one section and attach it in 14. Or sometimes you have to say, I submitted all these SUSARs in supporting documents, but you have to say that in the SMART form. Hopefully that'll be changed too. AIS will be able to change that. Yes?
So we were talking about the root cause for addressing events in the capital plan.
Yes.
And I mean, this happens, and I'm sure people don't want to ask this question, but what would be an appropriate capital response for a situation where the coordinator forgot, but there already is a visit checklist in place, and we just simply
Well, it's probably that they didn't use it. So like I have a bunch of vacuum cleaners at my house, but if I don't run them, it's not going to be picking up. So sometimes that happens. You forget to use it. You're busy.
So what would be the appropriate response for a CAPA in that situation?
That I will use the checklist in the future. Yeah. So I mean, sometimes there are honest mistakes, and you just forget, and you're busy, or you get it confused with another study. It happens. But you need to know why you did it so you won't do it again.
And then when it comes to patient complaints,
Yes.
where does financial responsibility fit into like welfare or, so like say a study has determined
That should be discussed in the informed consent process up front. They need to know this is what your insurance will pay for, and this is what the study will pay for. So you need to be very clear on that at the beginning of the study. If they do have a complaint about that, then they could call the HRPP office. You could submit a complaint, and we do deal with those. Rhonda deals with those.
This is quick, but I noticed under the reportable events, short forms, was a reportable event using the short form?
Yeah, it's not really a reportable event. I don't want to get all into that. It's just a mechanism to do something quickly. When you have a mod or a CRN, you can't do another mod. And if somebody shows up today and they speak Farsi, we don't want to lose them. We want them to be in the study. We want that to happen quickly. So I'll see the RE because I'm in there all day, every day. I dream about it almost every night. I will see that, and I can get that turned around in like 10 minutes. So it's just a mechanism. It's a workaround because of you can't have a mod and a CR at the same time. And it's very quick. You saw the numbers that Josh showed, thousands and thousands of mods. It's impossible to dig through there. So that's really not a reportable event, but it's a way to get things done quickly. Any other questions?
Just last statement, turn in your remote. Don't take them with you.
Thank you.